هي الدولة اللبنانية تردواني.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's top stories. Lebanese President Michel Sleiman follows up on border violations with Army Chief General Jean Ahwaji. Maronite Patriarch Bashar al-Baghi and Greek Orthodox leader Yohanna al-Yazdi called for the release of 2 bishops kidnapped in Syria. And Syrian rebels seize a key army position in the central province of Hama. Lebanese Armed Forces Commander General Jean Ahwaji has informed President Michel Sleiman of the details of the aggressions against Bekaa regions, mainly those on the borders with Syria. Ahwaji also informed the President of the Army's instruction to track down the fire sources and respond to them. Sleiman also met with Finance Minister Mohammed Safadi, with whom he took up the major developments regarding the ministry's work. Both men also engaged in talks on rectifying few mistakes made in the salary scale bill before referring to the Parliament. General Prosecutor Hatem Madi and Acting General Prosecutor Judge Samir Hamoud also visited the President at Barda Palace. Maronite Patriarch Bashar al-Baghi and Greek Orthodox leader Yohanna al-Yazdi have called for the release of 2 bishops kidnapped in a northern Syrian village. Al-Baghi and al-Yazdi expressed hope in a joint statement read by Bishop Boulos Matar that regional states and the international community will exert efforts to secure the release of all the kidnapped people in Syria. The statement voiced grief that the conflict in Syria is ongoing, calling on the Lebanese parties and international community to end their involvement in the turmoil in Syria. The 2 bishops, Yohanna Ibrahim and Boulos Yazdi, were kidnapped at the end of April near Aleppo in northern Syria. No group has claimed responsibility for their kidnapping, but sources close to the Greek Orthodox Church said Syrian authorities have claimed the kidnappers were Chechen jihadists. Free Patriotic Movement's Minister Gibran Bassil has denied that the ties with Hezbollah and Amal are shaky over the March 8 dispute on the 17-month parliamentary mandate extension. In remarks to a Safir newspaper, Bassil pointed out that the extension decision is wrong and said Hezbollah's regional distractions made the party take wrong decisions locally. Lawmakers extended their mandate end of May by pushing the parliamentary elections to November of 2014. The move came as a result of the failure of the rival parties to agree on a new law to govern the polls and amid the rejection of the implementation of the 1960 law that was used in the 2009 elections. Bassil pointed out that the FPM will agree to the 17-month extension if lawmakers agree to carry out the polls based on a new electoral law. Syrian rebels have seized a key army position in the central province of Hama, which lies on the road linking Damascus to Aleppo in the north. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the military responded by deploying en masse to try to take back the position at Morek and began shelling it. The source said 6 soldiers were killed. Observatory Director Rami Abdelrahman said the position is strategically important because it lies on the main road linking to the capital of Aleppo, largest swaths of which are under rebel control. The capture of the Morek position comes days after pro-regime media announced an upcoming campaign to take back Aleppo from rebel hands. The observatory also reported shelling on the Qabun suburb northeast of Damascus at dawn, as well as fierce clashes on the edges of Barzi in the north of the capital. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says the United States is considering options to aid Syrian opposition. For his part, British Foreign Secretary William Hague said Britain, the United States and allies in Europe and the region may need to step up their efforts to help the opposition.
We are deeply concerned about the dire situation in Syria, including the involvement of Hezbollah as well as Iran across state lines in another country. So we are focusing our efforts now on doing all that we can to support the opposition as they work to change the balance on the ground. And I think that there's a unanimity about the importance of trying to find a way to peace, not a way to war. Now, the Assad regime is making that very difficult. We will be, as everybody knows and has written about, we're meeting to talk about the various balances in this issue right now. And I have nothing to announce about that at this point. But clearly, the choice of weapons that he is engaged in across the board challenge anybody's values and standards of human behavior, and we're going to have to make judgments for ourselves about how we can help the opposition to be able to deal with that.
But what the regime is doing at the moment, and what you've seen over the last couple of weeks in the military action, supported in this case by Hezbollah, is making a political solution more difficult. It may be designed to make a political solution more difficult. And so our efforts in Syria have been to try to save lives, to prevent radicalization, to send a message to the regime that in the end there does have to be a political solution. That's why the United Kingdom has sent practical support to the opposition, to the national coalition, why we send so much humanitarian support. This is what our diplomatic effort is working towards, and so I think Secretary Kerry and I are in complete agreement about this. I also don't have any new announcement that we're making today about this, but we are determined that we will address this issue together and do our utmost to create the conditions for a political solution in Syria.
UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Navi Pillay says she fears bloodshed in recent battles for the Syrian town of Qusair will be repeated in the city of Aleppo and undermine peace efforts. The UN Human Rights Office says almost 93,000 people have been killed in Syria's conflict by the end of April this year, but the true number could be potentially much higher.
I am concerned that what happened in Qusair will happen in Aleppo. All the reports I'm receiving are augmentation of resources and forces on the part of the government. So hardly a scenario and a proper stage for negotiations at this stage. How would you begin negotiations with people who are intent on emerging as victors out of a violent struggle? So these are my concerns. Well, from the point of view of the United Nations, the Secretary General is solidly behind seeking a political solution through these Geneva negotiations, and Brahimi is ready. It needs the resolve of political actors to get to that table.
Coming up next, Filipino inmates debut in a film about reforms in a corrupt prison. That and more after the break. Welcome back. Israel has asked Russia to suspend the deliveries of the S-300 missiles to Syria as they pose a threat to Israel airspace. Moscow signed a contract with Damascus to deliver the S-300s, which are designed to shoot down planes and missiles at a 125-mile range. Military experts say it could significantly enhance Syria's Russian-supplied defenses and improve Assad's chances of holding out against the rebel forces. Russia has suggested the S-300 surface-to-air missiles are needed to discourage the West from arming the rebels. Western governments say the delivery of the advanced systems will undermine faith in Moscow's commitment to peace moves. Israel is expressing grave concern about prospects of such deliveries, arguing the missiles could become attacking weapons in the Middle East. No candidate appears to emerge victorious in Iran's June 14th presidential elections. Press TV cited recent opinion polls which indicate no candidate will garner over 50% of the vote, which would force a runoff vote on June the 21st. Iran's 6 presidential hopefuls were engaged in last-ditch campaigning on Wednesday, hoping to get the support of the millions of Iranians still undecided between a slew of conservatives and a moderate cleric backed by reformists 2 days before the vote. Momentum has built for cleric Hassan Rouhani, a former top nuclear negotiator, after the withdrawal of reformist Mohammad Reza Arif on Tuesday and the endorsement of 2 ex-presidents, pro-reform Mohammad Khatami and pragmatist Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani. An opinion poll published by the Mehr news agency says Kalibaf is leading the race with 17.8% support from 10,000 voters canvassed, ahead of Rouhani with 14.6%. They were followed by Jalili with only 9.8%. Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan has issued a last warning for thousands of protesters to evacuate an Istanbul park at the center of mass anti-government unrest after offering to hold a referendum on plans to redevelop the site. Erdogan had proposed a referendum to decide the future of Gezi Park development project so as to disperse demonstrators gathered at the park. Although Erdogan said that the government will respect the results of the referendum, it will not include any other issues. Meanwhile, Erdogan said his government will investigate and punish the police officers who acted out of line while dealing with the demonstrations. Analysts say the statement was a sign that Erdogan's attitude has softened. Local reports say Erdogan asked the interior minister to end the demonstration within 24 hours before meeting with the protesters. North Korea has blamed South Korea for scuttling fresh dialogue aiming to ease tensions between the rival Koreas, saying Seoul deliberately torpedoed reconciliation talks planned for the week. Observers say the latest outbursts indicates Pyongyang may seek a return to confrontation rather than dialogue. This week's aborted talks had been intended to reopen a closed joint industrial zone with the South in what would have been a confidence-building measure between two countries that remain officially at war. The talks were cancelled when the two Koreas disagreed over the rank of the officials to head the delegations that were to meet in Seoul. Earlier this year, North Korea threatened nuclear and missile strikes against South Korea and the United States after it was hit with UN sanctions for its February nuclear weapon test. And now for news around the world in brief. Up to 60% of high-speed rail services in France were expected to be cancelled today as part of a nationwide rail strike in France that was not forecast to impact travel to neighboring countries. State rail company SNCF said it forecasts only 4 out of 10 TGV high-speed services will run, and that 70% of intercity services faced cancellation. Unions are protesting at a planned restructuring of the rail system ahead of the opening up of the rail market to competition from other countries' operators and against job cuts. Greek workers have staged a nationwide strike against the abrupt closing of Greece's state broadcaster ERT, gathering outside the station in the thousands and calling on the government to reopen it. Communist Party leader Dimitris Koutsoupas demanded the government withdraw its decision, saying ERT belonged to Greeks. The government said the 75-year-old broadcaster will be reopened within months as a more efficient and less costly entity. Some 2,600 working at ERT now could apply for a job at the new station, but job cuts were inevitable. The world's first female astronaut praised China's recent launch of manned spacecraft Shenzhou 10, with the country's second female astronaut on board. Valentina Tereshkova, a female astronaut of the former Soviet Union, was interviewed by China's Central Television in Vienna on Wednesday. Tereshkova last traveled into space on June 16th of 1963. The UN held a 50th anniversary commemoration in Austria's capital city, which was attended by first female astronauts from China, the United States, Canada, and Japan. Filipino inmates who skyrocketed to internet fame on their dance renditions of Michael Jackson's hits debuted in a film about reforms in a corrupt prison. The inmates of Cebu Provincial Detention and Rehabilitation Center, whose videos earned 40 million hits on YouTube since 2007, played themselves in the movie Dance of the Steels Bars, which premiered in the Philippines yesterday. The plot is based on real-life reforms instituted at the Cebu jail, where security advisors thought of teaching dance to around 1,000 inmates not only as physical exercise, but also to instill discipline and camaraderie. Jails in the Philippines are notorious for overcrowded cells where gangs are at war and vices like drugs and gambling proliferate. The filmmakers wanted to highlight the transition of the Cebu jail, where suspects await verdicts on cases. One of the film's highlights is a 5-minute dance sequence that seeks to do justice to the real-life inmates' talent.
I did not only see them as brilliant dancers, but they are actually brilliant actors. We didn't have problems in terms of telling them how to act, because it's really natural. When I say you have to look sad here, they show it.
If you've already got a head start of 40 million people that are aware of that, that's a good start. So commercially it was very interesting, and actually the storyline, it has high narrative tension, it's got the set, the backdrop of the prison is nearly priceless, and it's got memorable characters.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. Lebanese President Michel Sleiman follows up on border violations with Army Chief General Jean Ahwaji. Maronite Patriarch Bashar Dahi and Greek Orthodox leader Yohanna Al-Yazji call for the release of 2 bishops kidnapped in Syria. And finally, Syrian rebels seize a key army position in the central province of Hama. Those are today's headlines from Future Television, live from Beirut. We'll see you again tomorrow for more of the world's top stories. Good night.
وين هي الدولة اللبنانية؟ وين هي؟